She helped a stranger in a snowstorm, unaware he was a vampire king with a life-changing gift. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. The snowstorm had come out of nowhere. One moment, the sky had been clear, but in the blink of an eye, dark clouds rolled in, and the temperature dropped drastically. Rachel wasn't prepared. She had been walking home after her late shift at the diner, clutching her jacket tight around her body, trying to shield herself from the freezing winds. The streets were empty, as most people had either taken shelter indoors or left for warmer places. But not Rachel. She had no choice but to brave the storm, her shift barely paying enough to cover her rent. As she trudged through the snow, her boots sinking deeper with each step, Rachel thought about how close she was to giving up. Just a few more blocks to her tiny apartment. If she could make it, she'd get a warm meal and some rest. But the storm had different plans. As she passed an alleyway, something caught her eye. There, lying in the snow, was a figure. A man, or what she thought was a man, crumpled on the ground, barely visible against the white backdrop of the snow. Without thinking, Rachel rushed to his side. His clothes were expensive, but they were soaked through, clinging to his body in the cold. His skin was deathly pale, almost unnatural. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and his face was obscured by his disheveled dark hair. "Hey, are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling from the cold. There was no response. She glanced around, but no one was near. The streets were silent. Her heart raced as she debated what to do. He needed help, and no one else was around. She couldn't just leave him there. With a deep breath, Rachel carefully lifted him, half carrying him as best as she could. His body felt unusually heavy for someone of his size, but she managed to get him to her apartment. Once inside, she placed him gently on her couch, noticing just how cold he felt against her warm furniture. She hurried to get him a blanket, and while she draped it over his body, her mind raced. Who was this man? What was he doing out here in a snowstorm dressed like this? As she turned to grab her phone to call for help, she saw his hand twitch. His eyes fluttered open, revealing an intense amber glow. It was almost as if his eyes were burning with an internal fire. Rachel froze. He looked at her, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he gave her a slow, deliberate gaze, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of her apartment. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice low and gravelly. Rachel blinked, trying to process what had just happened. The man's gaze seemed to pierce right through her, and for a brief moment, she felt an overwhelming sense of both fear and curiosity. Who was he? What did he want from her? And why had he been out in such a brutal storm? Before she could ask anything, he closed his eyes again, drifting back into unconsciousness. Rachel stared at him, wondering just who she had helped. Little did she know, this moment, this strange and mysterious encounter, would change her life forever. I watched him for what felt like hours, as if waiting for some sign that he was truly alive. His breathing was slow and steady, but the intensity in his eyes when he had first opened them was something I couldn't shake. The amber glow of his gaze lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder that something about him was so different, so strange. It was late when he finally stirred again. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, trying to keep my mind off the storm still raging outside, when I heard him groan softly from the couch. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed over to him, my steps quick but cautious. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly as I knelt beside him. He looked up at me, his eyes now no longer glowing, but still unsettlingly intense. "Where am I?" he asked in a voice that was deeper than I had expected. It was commanding, yet tired, as if the weight of centuries had worn him down. "You're in my apartment. You were passed out in the snowstorm. I brought you here to help you," I explained, trying to hide the confusion I felt. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he seemed to study me carefully, his gaze lingering on my face as if searching for something. After a long moment, he finally spoke. "I owe you my life," he said, his tone quiet but heavy with meaning. I felt a rush of relief flood through me. "I'm just glad I could help," I muttered, unsure of how to handle this strange situation. There was so much I wanted to ask him, but the words got stuck in my throat. "You don't know what you've done," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea who I am." "I know you're not normal," I said, before I could stop myself. "And I know you're not from here. But I don't care what you are. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." A brief smile flickered across his lips, a smile that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. "You are brave," he said, as if considering something important. "Most people would have run away. I wasn't about to leave you there to die," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me as I spoke. He studied me for a moment longer, then sighed, as though a great burden had settled upon his shoulders. "I am not someone you should have helped," he said, looking away. His voice held a depth of sadness I couldn't quite understand. "I have enemies. Dangerous ones. I'm not afraid of danger," I said, more out of instinct than anything else. He turned back to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You should be," he warned. "I'm not just any man. I am the Vampire King." The words hit me like a thunderclap. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "The Vampire King?" I repeated, trying to process the absurdity of what he was saying. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice steady, though his eyes seemed to darken with a hint of something ancient and powerful. "And my enemies would stop at nothing to destroy me, and anyone I care about." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. A Vampire King? That was impossible, wasn't it? But the more I looked at him, the more I realized that maybe nothing about him was normal. My mind raced as I tried to wrap my head around the fact that the man I had rescued was not just any man. He was something else. Something far beyond my understanding. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but one thing was certain. My life was never going to be the same again. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. He looked at me, his gaze softening for the first time since he had woken up. "I want nothing from you," he said, his voice low. "But you have already given me something. Your kindness, your compassion. It means more to me than you could ever know." I wasn't sure what to say to that. His words were both comforting and frightening at the same time. I had no idea what kind of danger I had just walked into, but I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, as if something ominous was waiting just beyond the horizon. "You should leave," he said suddenly, his voice firm. "Leave now, while you still can." I stared at him in shock. "What? Go. This is no place for you," he said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "I don't want to bring danger to you." I shook my head, standing up straight. "I'm not leaving you here. You're not alone anymore." He looked at me for a long moment, and then something in his eyes shifted. The expression on his face softened, and for the first time, he seemed almost human. "You are stubborn," he said with a faint smile. "Just like my enemies. I am not used to people like you." "Well," I said, trying to break the tension, "I'm used to helping people." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." There was a long pause, as we both seemed to take in the gravity of the situation. Then, slowly, he stood up, using the arm of the couch to push himself up. His movements were fluid, effortless. He seemed to regain some strength as he stood there, facing me. "You have already changed my life, Rachel," he said quietly, "in ways you cannot yet understand." I felt my heart race at the sound of my name on his lips. There was something powerful in the way he said it, as if it held some deeper meaning. Something I didn't yet know. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me for a long time before answering, his expression unreadable. "I mean," he said, his voice filled with quiet intensity, "that your life, too, is about to change. Forever." I woke up the next morning to an uneasy silence. The snowstorm had finally stopped, but the air still felt thick with tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, something beyond my control. As I made my way into the kitchen, I found him there, sitting by the window, staring out at the now still streets. He looked like he belonged in another world, a world far removed from my small apartment and the life I had known. "You didn't sleep," I said, my voice breaking the quiet. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine. There was a strange depth in them, as though he was carrying a burden I couldn't understand. "I don't need sleep," he replied, his voice low, almost like a whisper, as though speaking any louder would shatter the fragile peace between us. "What do you mean you don't need sleep?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked back out the window, his expression unreadable. There is much you don't know about me, he said finally, his gaze intense. And much I can't explain yet. But know this, my enemies are close. And the moment they discover where I am, they will come for both of us. I felt a chill run down my spine, a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather outside. What kind of enemies? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to face me, his eyes burning with an intensity that made my heart race. The kind who will stop at nothing, he said. The kind who will destroy anyone in their way, without mercy. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I should be more afraid of him or the invisible enemies he spoke of. I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling. You keep saying you're the Vampire King, but how is that possible? I mean, it sounds impossible. He smiled then, a bitter, sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. I know it's hard to believe, he said softly. I wouldn't expect you to understand. But I assure you, I am who I say I am. But you're not human, I said, stating the obvious. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. No, I am not. And that's why you must leave. Leave? I echoed, shocked. Why would I leave? Because staying here with me is dangerous, he said, standing up, his tall frame casting a shadow over the room. I am a threat to everyone around me. And now you are too. I don't care about that, I said, my voice firm. I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not after everything. He froze, his expression hardening. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising slightly. You think you're helping, but you're putting yourself in danger. You think this is just some fantasy, some story, but it's real, and it will destroy you. Then I'll take that risk, I said, feeling a surge of determination. I couldn't just leave you out there in the cold. I couldn't turn my back on you now. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his face a mixture of frustration and something else, something softer, almost like relief. You're stubborn, he muttered, almost to himself. Just like someone I once knew. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he walked past me, his hand brushing mine as he moved. I don't know what to do with you, he said, his voice barely audible. I never expected anyone like you. What do you mean? I asked, but he didn't respond. He stopped by the door, his hand resting on the handle as if he were about to leave. I should go, he said, his tone distant. I can't put you in more danger. No, I said quickly, stepping forward. You can't leave. Not like this. I won't let you. He turned to face me then, his expression conflicted. You're not understanding, he said, his voice low and controlled. You're already involved. Whether you like it or not. I don't care, I replied. I've already made my choice. I'm not walking away. He studied me for a long moment before giving a reluctant nod. You're as stubborn as they come, he said with a half smile, though his eyes were still filled with uncertainty. But that's what I like about you. I could feel my heart skip a beat at his words. There was something in the way he looked at me, something that made me believe that maybe, just maybe, this was not just some twisted story. This was real. And somehow, I was part of it. Fine, he said finally, a sigh escaping his lips. You stay? But you need to know one thing. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. The moment you get involved with me, there's no turning back. Your life as you know it is over. You'll never be the same again. I'm ready for that, I said, feeling my resolve strengthen. I don't care what happens. I'm not afraid. He looked at me for a long time, then slowly stepped forward, his hand reaching out to me. You may not be afraid now, he said quietly. But soon, you will be. The way he said it made my heart race. Was it a warning? A promise? Or both? I watched him closely as he paced back and forth, his intense gaze never leaving me. There was a coldness in the air now, a palpable tension that seemed to cling to everything around us. The Vampire King, the man I had saved, stood before me, and yet I still couldn't fully grasp what this meant for my life. I had never believed in the supernatural, never imagined my life would be anything but ordinary. But everything was different now, and it seemed like the only way forward was through a world I didn't understand. What happens next? I asked, my voice breaking the silence. You stay with me, he said, his voice steady but filled with something I couldn't quite place. Until you understand what this is, what you're really involved in. His words made my heart race. I wasn't ready for this, wasn't prepared to be swept into a world of danger and darkness. But the choice had already been made. I'm not going anywhere. I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He looked at me, his amber eyes burning with intensity. You don't know what you're saying, he replied, his tone softer now. Once you step into my world, there is no turning back. It's not just about me, it's about everyone I care about. I swallowed hard. What does that mean? Who else is involved? He hesitated before answering, as if weighing his words carefully. My people. My kingdom. There are others who will come after you once they know who you are to me. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what he was saying. To me? I asked. I'm just a waitress. I don't have anything to do with your world. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You don't understand yet, but you will. I need you to trust me. The weight of his words settled on me, and for the first time, I felt a surge of fear mixed with something else, something I couldn't name. I don't know how to trust you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. How can I when everything is so impossible? Trust comes with time, he said, his voice low. And I'm not asking for much. Just your patience. There are things you need to know, things that will make sense of all this. I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but I could see that now wasn't the time. Instead, I nodded, though my heart was still heavy with uncertainty. So what now? I asked, hoping to get some sense of direction. Now we wait, he said, glancing toward the window where the storm had passed, but the night still felt eerily silent. I don't know when they'll come, but I do know it's only a matter of time. His words hit me like a jolt. Who will come? I asked, unable to stop myself. He looked at me, his expression darkening. My enemies, he said simply. They won't stop until they find me. And when they do, you'll be at risk. I'm not afraid of them, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I wasn't sure if I truly wasn't afraid, but I wasn't about to show weakness. He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by my response. You should be, he said. You have no idea the lengths they'll go to. A chill ran down my spine, but I stood my ground. Then we fight back, I said, more to myself than to him. He stared at me, his gaze unreadable. You don't know what you're saying. Then teach me, I replied, meeting his eyes. Teach me how to survive this, how to help you. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He simply looked at me, his expression softening. You're stronger than you think, he said finally. But there's a lot you'll need to learn before this is over. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with mine. You might think you are, he said quietly. But this is a world where the stakes are higher than you can imagine. Lives are at risk. And once you're in, there's no going back. I felt a shiver of fear creep up my spine, but I didn't back away. I couldn't. I had made my choice, and now there was no turning back. I don't care, I said. I'm in. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see something flicker in his eyes. Something I couldn't quite define. Then, without another word, he turned away and walked toward the door. I'll show you the truth, he said, his voice low. But know this, once you step into this world, everything will change. I'm ready, I repeated, my heart pounding in my chest. As the door clicked shut behind him, I stood there, alone, wondering if I had made the right choice. But deep down, I knew there was no turning back now. I was already in his world, and whatever came next, I would face it head on. The Vampire King had just begun to show me the path, and I had no idea where it would lead. But I was determined to find out. I sat there, staring at the door for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. The Vampire King had left me with more questions than answers, but his words kept echoing in my head. Once you're in, there's no going back. What had I gotten myself into? I wasn't afraid, or at least, I tried not to be. But the gravity of the situation was starting to hit me. I wasn't just living in a world where I had to pay bills and take care of myself anymore. No, now I was in a world full of vampires, enemies, and mysteries I didn't understand. And the worst part? I had no idea what was coming. Next, I was pulled out of my thoughts when I heard the door creak open. He walked back in, his eyes darker than before, as if something had changed in him. You're still here, he said, almost as if he didn't expect me to be. I said I wouldn't leave. I replied, standing up from the couch. My voice felt steady, but my heart was still racing. You don't have to keep me here, but I'm not running away. Not from this. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. There was something in his gaze that made me feel small, yet at the same time, oddly empowered. You should understand by now that this is no ordinary life, he said, his tone low. The moment you decided to stay, you became a part of something far bigger than yourself. You're not just helping me, you're putting yourself in a world you can't control. And I'm okay with that, I said, surprising myself with my own confidence. I made my choice. I'll deal with whatever comes. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You don't know what you're dealing with, he said again, but there was a hint of respect in his voice now. But you will. And soon, you'll have to make harder choices. Decisions that could cost you everything. I didn't want to show any fear, so I simply nodded. Then let's get started, I said, meeting his gaze. What do we do now? He looked at me for a moment, as if weighing my words. Finally, he sighed. We train. We prepare. And we wait. Wait for what? I asked, my mind still racing. He hesitated, then said, wait for my enemies to make their move. I felt a chill run down my spine at his words, but I didn't let it show. And what if they don't make a move? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He smiled then, but it wasn't a comforting smile. They will. It's only a matter of time. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. He didn't tell me much about his past, but he did show me his world. A world full of ancient power, hidden dangers, and enemies I couldn't see. He took me places I had only heard about in whispers, places where shadows lingered and the air felt heavier than usual. There were moments when I felt out of place, like a fish out of water, but with every passing hour, I became more and more immersed in his world. He taught me how to fight, how to defend myself, and most importantly, how to trust my instincts. Your mind will be your greatest weapon, he told me one night as we trained in the dim light of the apartment. Not just your strength, but your ability to read the situation, to know when to strike and when to wait. I'm learning, I said, my muscles aching as I struggled to keep up. He gave me a small nod, though I could tell he was holding back. He was used to this life, to the danger and the rules of the supernatural world, but I was still a beginner. It wasn't long before the tension that had been building up between us became undeniable. I wasn't sure what it was, whether it was the way he looked at me, or the way his presence seemed to consume the space between us, but something shifted. I couldn't ignore it any longer. One night, after a long day of training, I found myself alone with him in the quiet of the apartment. He had been unusually silent, his mind lost in thought. You're still here, he said, looking up from the window where he had been staring into the night. You've been through so much, yet you're still standing. I'm not going anywhere, I replied, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving me. The air between us felt electric, charged with something I couldn't name. You're stronger than you know, he said quietly, his voice low and intimate. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot everything else. There was only him. And I'll protect you, he added, his voice barely a whisper. His words seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, and I felt a sense of calm settle over me. For the first time, I believed him. But I also knew that everything was about to change. The calm before the storm was over. The enemies he had warned me about were getting closer, and I could feel it in the air. Whatever was coming next, I wasn't sure I was ready for. But I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when I was finally starting to understand who I was in this world. Then we'll face it together, I said, my voice steady, though I was trembling inside. He nodded slowly, his gaze softening. Together, he agreed. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something else, something darker. The storm was coming. And this time, I wasn't sure if we would survive it. I woke up to a strange stillness in the air. The kind of quiet that only comes before a storm. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the city's skyline outside the window. I could hear the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees, but it was almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. I sat up, my body sore from the intense training sessions we had been going through over the past few days. I had learned more in those few days than I ever thought possible, but it still didn't feel like enough. My mind was spinning with everything I had been told. The Vampire King had shown me his world, but there was still so much I didn't understand. I had thought I knew what I was getting into, but now I realized I had only scratched the surface. My life, once so simple, was now entangled in a web of lies, danger, and a world beyond anything I had ever imagined. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cold floor against my feet. The apartment was eerily quiet. I stood up and made my way toward the kitchen, where I could see him sitting by the table, staring out the window. The Vampire King, Adrian. He had been quiet the last few days, his usual commanding presence subdued. There was something different in the air now, something that felt heavier than usual. He didn't look up when I entered the room, his expression unreadable. "You've been up all night?" I said softly, stepping closer to him. "What's going on?" He turned slowly to face me, his amber eyes burning with an intensity one couldn't quite place. "They're coming," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Who?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "The ones I've been running from," he replied, his gaze hardening. "The ones who want to destroy me. And you." I felt a cold chill run through me at his words. The danger he had warned me about was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it was closer than I had ever imagined. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We fight," he said, standing up. "And we win." His words were filled with an urgency I hadn't heard before. There was a fire in his eyes, something fierce and untamed. I knew then that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something deeper, something I was still struggling to understand. "How do we fight?" I asked, my mind racing. He walked over to a nearby drawer and pulled out a small, intricately designed dagger. It glinted in the dim light, the blade sharp and deadly. "This is how," he said, handing it to me. "This is a weapon you'll need, not just to defend yourself, but to help me protect what matters." I took the dagger from him, the weight of it sinking in. I had never held a weapon before, never imagined I would. But here I was, holding something meant for a battle I didn't fully understand. "I'm not ready for this," I said, feeling the fear creeping in. "None of us are ready," he replied, his voice steady. "But we don't have a choice. The war is coming, and we have to be ready." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. The fight was coming, and there was no turning back now. I had made my choice, and I couldn't back out. Not when so much was at stake. Adrian's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something human in him. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice gentle. "But you're stronger than you think. You've already proven that." I didn't say anything, just gripped the dagger tightly, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't sure what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. "I'm ready," I said finally, my voice steady. "Then let's go," Adrian said, his tone shifting back to the commanding voice I had become accustomed to. "The battle is starting, and we're going to fight it together." He moved toward the door, and I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew I wasn't alone. We were in this together, and whatever came next, we would face it head-on. The storm was coming, but we were ready to face it. And for the first time since meeting Adrian, I felt something more than fear. I felt a spark of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could survive this. I could feel the tension in the air as Adrian and I made our way down the winding corridors of the building. Every step echoed in the silence, and though I had no idea what to expect, I knew the storm was far from over. Adrian's footsteps were quiet, almost soundless, but there was an energy about him that made the air feel heavier, like the calm before a thunderstorm. I gripped the dagger he had given me tightly in my hand, trying to steady my nerves. It was all too much, and yet, somehow, everything felt like it was leading up to this moment. "Are you ready?" Adrian's voice broke through my thoughts, and I nodded without hesitation, though I could feel the fear still swirling inside me. "I have to be," I replied. "I can't run away from this anymore." Adrian didn't say anything for a moment. He just glanced at me, his amber eyes studying me like he was trying to understand something deep inside me. He had that way of looking at people, as if he could see everything, their fears, their hopes, their secrets. It was both unsettling and comforting at the same time. "This won't be easy," he said finally, his voice low. "And there's no guarantee we'll make it out alive." "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "But I'm with you, no matter what happens." Adrian nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. He turned back toward the hallway, his figure silhouetted in the dim light as he walked ahead. I followed closely behind, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling of dread that kept creeping up my spine. We reached the large door at the end of the corridor, a door I hadn't seen before. Adrian paused in front of it, his hand hovering over the handle for a moment before he spoke again. "They'll be waiting for us on the other side," he said quietly. "The ones who want to destroy me. But they'll have to go through both of us to do it." I felt a shiver run down my spine at his words. I didn't have the strength or the knowledge to fight a war like the one he was talking about, but I couldn't back down now. I was already in this, and I wasn't going to let Adrian face it alone. "We'll make it through," I said, more to myself than to him. Adrian turned the handle and pushed the door open, revealing a darkened room beyond. The only light came from a few scattered candles, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As we stepped inside, I could feel the temperature drop, and the air grew thick with anticipation. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "You're late." A voice suddenly rang out from the shadows. My heart skipped a beat, and I tensed, instinctively taking a step closer to Adrian. The voice was low, dripping with malice, and I could feel its power radiating off the figure that stepped forward from the darkness. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark robes that seemed to absorb the dim light. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and calculating. "This is the human who's been causing all the trouble," the figure sneered, his voice full of disdain. Adrian didn't flinch. "This is none of your concern, Devon," he said, his tone as cold as the air around us. "You've got bigger problems to worry about than her." Devon's laugh was low and sinister. "You think I'm scared of you, Adrian? You're nothing but a fallen king. And now, you've dragged a human into this mess. How touching." I gripped the dagger tightly, my fingers trembling, but I refused to show fear. I didn't know who this Devon was, but he clearly had a deep hatred for Adrian. And that made him my enemy too. "You don't belong in this world," Devon said, his eyes narrowing as they flicked back to me. "Humans never do. You're all nothing more than pawns in a game you can't even begin to understand." "I'm not afraid of you," I said, stepping forward, though my voice shook. "I don't care about your world or your games. I'm here because I want to help him, and I'll fight for that." Devon's eyes glinted with amusement. "Is that so? You'll fight for him? A fallen king, a vampire who doesn't have the strength to protect his own." My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer to Adrian, standing by his side. I didn't know if I had the power to fight, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this stranger tear everything apart. "You won't win," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Not against us." Devon's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "We'll see about that," he said ominously. With a snap of his fingers, the air in the room seemed to shift, and the shadows around us deepened. Figures emerged from the darkness, cloaked in black, their eyes glowing faintly red. "The game has begun," Devon said, his voice full of anticipation. "Let's see who's left standing when it's over." Adrian stepped forward, his body radiating power. "I don't need to win," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "I just need to survive." I stood by his side, gripping the dagger tighter, ready for whatever was about to come. The fight had started, and I was going to stand my ground. I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. I could feel the air thickening with danger as the cloaked figures stepped out of the shadows, their eyes glowing a faint, ominous red. The temperature in the room dropped, and the silence stretched long, only broken by the soft rustle of their movement. Devon stood at the center of it all, his smile cold and knowing, like he was watching a game he had already won. "You really think you can stand against us?" Devon sneered, his voice laced with disdain. "You're nothing. Just a human caught in something you can't comprehend. And your king, he's weak." Adrian's body was tense beside me, his eyes hard, the air around him crackling with barely contained power. He didn't say a word, but I could feel the fury inside him. "You talk too much," Adrian finally said, his voice like ice, his gaze never leaving Devon. I could sense the power building around him, a force I couldn't even begin to understand. "This is not your fight anymore," Devon said, raising a hand. "It's mine." The shadows that surrounded us seemed to pulse with energy, and the figures behind Devon moved in closer. They were vampires, I realized with a start. But not like Adrian. These were darker, more dangerous, and far more ruthless. I gripped the dagger tighter, trying to steady my nerves. I didn't know what I could do, but I wasn't going to let them take Adrian without a fight. "Stay close," Adrian whispered to me, his voice low but full of authority. I nodded, my heart racing. I could feel his power now, more than I ever had before, and it was both comforting and terrifying. The room felt suffocating, the air charged with an energy I didn't understand. The vampire who had stepped closest to me sneered, and I felt the cold, predatory energy coming off of him. "Stay out of this, human," he growled, his fangs gleaming in the dim light. "You have no place here." Before I could react, Adrian moved with the speed of a blur, his hand grabbing the vampire by the throat and slamming him into the wall. The force of the impact shook the room, and the vampire gasped for breath, his body struggling against Adrian's grip. "I'm not asking you," Adrian said in a voice colder than ice. "Get out of my way." The vampire's eyes widened in fear, but he didn't respond. Adrian's grip tightened, and with a swift motion, he threw the vampire across the room. The figure hit the far wall with a sickening thud, crumpling to the floor, unconscious. I stared, stunned, as the others in the room seemed to hesitate for a moment, shocked by the sheer force Adrian had unleashed. But Devon's voice cut through the silence, cold and commanding. "You can't stop me, Adrian. You never could." "We'll see about that," Adrian replied, his voice steady as he turned back to face Devon. His power was palpable now, filling the room like a living thing. I could feel it pulling at me, a dark energy that made me dizzy, but I held my ground. Devon's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from amusement to something darker. "You're weaker than I thought," he said, almost disappointed. "But I'm done playing games." With a flick of his hand, Devon sent out a wave of dark energy that hit me like a wall. I gasped, feeling it push against me, my knees buckling under the force. I barely had time to react when Adrian was there, grabbing me by the shoulders and pulling me close. "Don't let it touch you," he said urgently, his voice low. "Fight it." I nodded, trying to steady my breath as the dark energy tried to claw at my mind. I could feel the weight of it, heavy and suffocating, but I focused on Adrian's presence, grounding myself in his calm. His energy was a stark contrast to the cold darkness Devon had sent my way, and I clung to it like a lifeline. I could feel Adrian's hand on my back, his strength anchoring me as the energy pulsed through me. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice soft but fierce. "Stay with me. We fight together." His words were like a spark, lighting something inside me that I hadn't known was there. I could feel the power growing in my chest, responding to Adrian's command. The dark energy Devon had thrown at me began to fade, my own strength pushing it back. "You're strong," Adrian murmured, his hand steady against my back. "I've always known you were." With that, I turned my gaze back to Devon. He stood there, watching us with a look of disbelief. "You can't be serious," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You're just a human. You can't fight me." But there was something in his eyes now, something that said he wasn't so sure anymore. Adrian took a step forward, his expression unreadable. "It's not about fighting you, Devon," he said, his voice cold. "It's about surviving. And I'm not leaving without her." The tension in the room was unbearable as Devon took a step back, his eyes flicking between us. He seemed to weigh his options, and for a moment, I thought he might retreat. But then his lips curled into a twisted smile. "This isn't over, Adrian," he said, his voice full of malice. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." With that, Devon disappeared into the shadows, his followers vanishing with him. The room was silent once again, the danger still thick in the air. Adrian stood still for a moment, his eyes scanning the room, making sure the threat was gone. Then he turned to me, his gaze softening. "We're not out of danger yet," he said quietly. "But we're alive." I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "Alive," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time, I felt like we had a chance. A chance to survive, and maybe, just maybe, to win. I stood in the aftermath of the battle, my heart still pounding in my chest. The air was thick with the remnants of the dark energy Devon had thrown at us. Even though the fight was over, for now, the tension hadn't lifted. Adrian stood beside me, his eyes scanning the shadows, as if expecting Devon to jump out at any moment. I could feel his power still lingering, barely contained, like a storm ready to break. "You're not alone in this," Adrian had told me before, and now, more than ever, I knew how true those words were. I was in a world far beyond anything I had imagined, a world where danger lurked at every corner, where nothing was ever simple. And yet, I was still here, still standing, and I wasn't going anywhere. Are you okay? Adrian asked quietly, turning to face me. His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. I'm fine, I said, though the words felt too weak to be true. The truth was, I didn't know if I was fine. I had just fought beside a vampire king, and we had barely survived an attack from enemies who wanted us both dead. But even in the chaos, something had shifted inside me. I had faced my fear head-on, and somehow, I had found the strength to keep fighting. We're not done yet, Adrian said, his voice serious as he looked me over one last time. Devon won't stop. He'll be back, and we have to be ready. I looked at him, his features hard but his eyes soft, and I could see the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had always carried it, the burden of leadership, of being a king. But now, with me by his side, it felt different. He wasn't alone anymore. I know, I replied, taking a deep breath. We'll be ready. Adrian gave me a slight nod, but his expression was distant, lost in thought. I could see how much he was carrying, how much he was hiding beneath the surface. The fight had only been the beginning, and there was so much more ahead. The danger was only just beginning to rear its ugly head. But one thing was certain, we would face it together. The room felt heavier now, the silence settling in, as if the entire world was waiting for something. We need to move, Adrian said suddenly, breaking the stillness. The others will be here soon, and we can't stay here. The others? I asked, confused. Who else is coming? You'll see, he said, his voice darkening. But we don't have time to waste. Adrian turned, moving quickly toward the door. I followed, my heart racing once more as we left the safety of the room behind. The hallway was still, the only sound the faint echo of our footsteps. As we stepped out into the night, the chill in the air hit me like a wave, but I didn't flinch. The cold wasn't as biting as it had been before. Now, with Adrian by my side, I felt stronger. The danger we had just faced was nothing compared to what we were about to encounter. But for the first time since all this had begun, I didn't feel as alone. I didn't feel as afraid. Adrian stopped in front of a large wooden door, the kind you would find in an ancient castle, carved with intricate designs. They're here, he said, his voice quiet, but filled with purpose. I nodded, my fingers tightening around the dagger in my hand. I wasn't sure what to expect behind that door, but I knew that I had no choice but to face it. Adrian opened the door with a quiet creak, and we stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the walls lined with ancient tapestries that seemed to whisper in the quiet. At the far end of the room, a group of figures stood in the shadows. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their presence. Strong, powerful, and dangerous. One of them stepped forward, and I immediately recognized the figure. A woman, tall and regal, with long silver hair that cascaded down her back. Her eyes were sharp, piercing, and full of centuries of knowledge. She wore a dark cloak, but there was no mistaking the air of authority that surrounded her. Adrian, she said, her voice rich and commanding. You've kept us waiting long enough. I didn't have a choice, Adrian replied, his voice tight. Devon was close. He was never going to stop. The woman studied me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as she took me in. This is the human? She asked, her voice curious but not unkind. Adrian nodded. This is Rachel, he said, his tone softer now. She's with me. The woman looked at me again, and this time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something I couldn't quite place. You're brave, she said, her voice unexpectedly warm. But bravery doesn't always protect you. I looked at Adrian, who nodded slightly. I'm not afraid, I said, though my voice betrayed me. Not anymore. The woman smiled then, a knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. You will be, she said softly, turning back to Adrian. We all will be. The war has only just begun. I stood in the dim light, still trying to wrap my mind around everything. The woman who had just spoken was still watching me closely, her silver hair shimmering in the candlelight. She didn't seem to care much for pleasantries, and the weight of her gaze made me feel both uncomfortable and strangely empowered. Adrian stood beside me, his posture rigid, but I could feel the quiet strength emanating from him. You're right, they're coming, he said, his voice steady as ever. But we're not unprepared this time. The woman nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly as if evaluating Adrian's words. "We'll see," she said, turning to look at the group of figures behind her. They were quiet, like shadows waiting to pounce, each one just as mysterious and unsettling as the last. "You're not the only one with enemies, Adrian," she added, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "We've all been running from them for longer than you realize." I couldn't help but wonder just how much was at stake here. Everything I had thought I knew about the world was slipping away, replaced by a reality that was as dark as it was dangerous. And now I was in the middle of it, tangled up in a fight that wasn't mine, but one I couldn't walk away from. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice sounding small compared to the gravity of the situation. The woman turned her eyes back to me, her expression softening slightly. "You fight," she said simply. "That's the only option." Left. Adrian glanced at me, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something he didn't often show, uncertainty. "We fight, but we also gather our forces," he said, his tone changing. "I can't do this alone. Not this time." The woman nodded again, as if she had been expecting this answer. "The others are already on their way," she said. "We'll be ready, but we'll need every ally we can find. And I mean everyone, even the ones you've left behind." Her words hit me like a thunderclap. "Allies," I repeated. "Who else is out there?" Adrian's gaze flicked to me, his eyes a mixture of sadness and determination. "People I trusted. People I thought were lost. But they're still out there. And they'll come." His voice was steady, but I could see the weight of his past in his eyes. The regret. The sacrifices. "We'll need to find them quickly," the woman said, stepping forward. "The others are making their move now. Devon's allies are already gathering. We can't afford to waste time." I didn't understand all the details yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much bigger, about power, loyalty, and the forces that would stop at nothing to see Adrian fall. And I couldn't let that happen. "I'm ready," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Adrian turned to me, his expression softening. "You don't have to be," he said quietly, "but I'm glad you're here." I wanted to say something, anything, to comfort him, but words felt useless in the face of everything that was happening. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming, but I knew that standing by his side was the only choice I had left. "Let's go," I said, straightening up. Adrian nodded, his hand brushing against mine as he walked past me, leading the way. The woman gave me a final look before following us, the rest of her group trailing behind. The door closed behind us with a heavy thud, and we stepped out into the cold, the weight of our mission pressing down on us. The night was still and silent, but I could feel the storm that was coming. It wasn't just the weather. It was something darker, more dangerous than anything I had ever imagined. And we were right. In the middle of it, as we walked through the dark streets, Adrian's presence beside me was both comforting and unsettling. I could feel the tension in the air, but I also knew that we had a chance. We weren't going to give up. Not now. Not after everything. The road ahead was uncertain, but I had made my choice. I was fighting for Adrian, and nothing was going to stop me from standing by his side. We walked for what felt like hours, the silence between us heavy, filled with thoughts of the battle ahead. My hand still gripped the dagger tightly, but now it didn't feel as foreign. It felt like an extension of myself, like something I could use to protect what I cared about. Adrian stopped suddenly, causing me to nearly collide with him. He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to gauge my readiness. "This is it," he said, his voice low and serious. "Once we go in, there's no turning back. We'll face them together, or we'll fall apart." I didn't hesitate. "Together," I said firmly. Adrian nodded, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not just power, but something softer, something more human. He turned and pushed open a door, the sound of it creaking loudly in the quiet night. And as we stepped inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The storm was coming, and we were ready to face it, together. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, the air thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. Adrian was just a few steps ahead, his posture straight, his movements precise. I could feel the tension radiating off him as he surveyed the room, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Behind him, the woman with silver hair, Leora, followed closely, her expression as unreadable as ever. The group she led was still in the hallway, waiting for the signal. Everything felt like it was happening too fast, but at the same time, I knew there was no turning back. Stay close, Adrian said quietly, turning to me. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge in it, a sign of the storm that was brewing. I nodded, feeling a sense of calm in the chaos, knowing that whatever happened, we were facing it together. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved amulet. He held it in his hand for a moment before slipping it into my palm. The cool metal of the amulet sent a jolt of energy through me, a sensation I couldn't fully explain. It's a protective charm, he said, his eyes meeting mine. It won't stop everything, but it will help. I clenched my fingers around it, feeling the weight of his words. Thank you, I whispered. He didn't respond, just nodded once, and turned back to the room ahead. I took a deep breath and followed him. The room was large, with high ceilings and walls lined with ancient books and relics. The atmosphere felt oppressive, as if the weight of the years, centuries, maybe, hung in the air. A large table stood in the center of the room, and around it, a group of vampires waited, their eyes glowing in the dim light. Each one exuded power, an aura of ancient strength that made me feel small in comparison. Adrian stepped forward, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned toward him, but he didn't flinch. This ends tonight, Adrian said, his voice firm, filled with the authority of someone who had once ruled and now would do whatever it took to protect what mattered. The vampires exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Leora stepped up beside him, her gaze cold and calculating. We've come to reclaim what is ours, she said, her voice carrying a deadly edge. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that everything was about to change. I had no idea what was coming, but one thing was certain. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. You've lost, Devon, Adrian said, his eyes narrowing. You've betrayed everything we stood for. Your allies are gone. A figure stepped forward from the group of vampires, and my heart sank when I saw who it was. Devon. He was just as I remembered, dark, tall, with an aura of danger that made him impossible to ignore. His eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel the malice radiating from him. You think you've won? Devon sneered, his lips curling into a cruel smile. You're nothing but a fallen king, Adrian, a shadow of what you once were. And this is just the beginning of the end. The air seemed to shift as Devon's words settled over the room. He was trying to provoke Adrian, trying to get under his skin. But Adrian didn't respond, his gaze steady, his jaw clenched. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken threats. I could feel the tension building, the dangerous energy in the room intensifying with every passing second. Enough of this, Leora said sharply, her voice cutting through the stillness. We've waited long enough. She raised her hand, and the vampires around the table began to move. In an instant, everything exploded into chaos. The vampires lunged at us, their movements too fast for me to track, but Adrian was already in motion. He was a blur, his strength and speed overwhelming as he struck down the first vampire with a single, devastating blow. I stumbled back, the amulet Adrian had given me still clutched tightly in my hand. I barely had time to react before another vampire was upon me, their claws reaching for my throat. Panic surged through me, but before I could make a move, I felt Adrian's presence beside me. He grabbed the vampire by the wrist, twisting it with a vicious snap. The vampire screamed and fell to the ground, but Adrian didn't stop. He was relentless, taking down each vampire with precision and fury. The room was filled with the sound of fighting, the clash of power and fury. I was frozen for a moment, watching him fight with a grace and strength that left me in awe. But then I remembered the dagger in my hand. I couldn't just stand there. I had to help. I rushed toward the nearest vampire, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know how to fight like Adrian, but I had learned enough to know that hesitation meant death. With a deep breath, I lunged at the vampire, plunging the dagger into its side. It hissed in pain and staggered back, but I didn't let go. I drove the blade deeper, feeling the warmth of blood on my hands as the vampire collapsed. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pulled the dagger out, but I didn't have time to think. Adrian was still fighting, still moving through the chaos like a force of nature, and I had to keep up. Together, we were strong enough to take on whatever Devon and his allies threw at us. But we couldn't stop now. Not until it was over. I could feel the battle around me intensifying as Adrian fought with an otherworldly grace, each strike precise and powerful. The air crackled with energy, the tension in the room palpable as the vampires swarmed around us, their fangs bared and their eyes glowing with malicious intent. I wasn't sure how much longer we could hold them off. My arms ached from the fighting, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't afford to stop. Adrian was still beside me, his movements fluid and swift as he cut through the enemy ranks, but there were too many. I had to fight, too. I wasn't just a spectator in this world anymore. I was part of it. With each swing of my dagger, I took down another vampire, the weight of the blade heavy in my hand, but the power behind it, undeniable. They were fast, too fast, but I had learned to move with precision, to strike when the opportunity came. My heart raced as I fought, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was adrenaline. It was strength. And it was the knowledge that I was fighting for something far bigger than myself. Stay close. Adrian's voice rang out above the chaos. But his words were more than just a command. They were a lifeline. I looked at him, his face set in determination, his body a blur of movement as he struck down another vampire. For a split second, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, a flicker of trust, of something he had never shown anyone before. It made my heart beat faster, but I couldn't dwell on it. Not now. Not when the fight was still raging. Another vampire lunged at me, but I was ready. I twisted to the side, dodging the attack and plunging my dagger into its chest. It let out a blood-curdling scream before crumpling to the floor. I didn't have time to breathe. The next one was already coming at me, its claws reaching for my throat. But before it could get any closer, Adrian was there, his hand gripping the vampire's throat with ease, lifting it off the ground. With a flick of his wrist, the vampire was gone, its body crumpling to dust. I didn't say anything, just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the fact that we were still standing, still fighting, and still alive. But the battle was far from over. We were outnumbered, and Devon was still out there, waiting for his chance to strike. Adrian's gaze turned toward the back of the room, his eyes narrowing in focus. "It's time," he said, his voice filled with cold certainty. I didn't need to ask what he meant. I could feel it too, the shift in the air, the sense that something more dangerous was about to happen. Adrian moved with purpose, his hand outstretched to me as he gestured for me to follow. Without hesitation, I ran after him, my heart racing as we made our way toward the far side of the room. The vampires were still trying to regroup, but they were faltering now, their numbers thinning as Adrian and I fought side by side. "Stay close," Adrian repeated, his voice low but urgent. I didn't have to be told twice. I stayed right by his side as we moved through the chaos. And then, as if the world had shifted on its axis, we saw him. Devon. He stood at the far end of the room, his eyes burning with fury, his fangs bared in a snarl. The battle had come down to this moment. "You've brought this on yourself, Adrian," Devon said, his voice dripping with venom. "You never should have come back. You should have stayed in the shadows, where you belong." Adrian stepped forward, his presence commanding. "I don't belong in the shadows, Devon," he said, his voice low, but filled with authority. "And neither do you." The two of them locked eyes, their gazes like daggers, and I could feel the tension crackling between them, so thick it was suffocating. "This ends now," Adrian said, his voice steady, but filled with the weight of everything he had been through. Devon smirked, his eyes flicking briefly to me. "You've brought the human into this, Adrian. You're weaker than I thought." I gripped my dagger tighter, my fingers cold but determined. I wasn't going to let him get to Adrian. Not this time. Devon's smirk faded, and he lunged at Adrian, his speed too fast for me to even register. But Adrian was ready. He moved in a blur, sidestepping Devon's attack and striking with lethal precision. The sound of their battle was deafening, the clash of power and fury filling the room. I could barely keep up, but I didn't back down. I kept my eyes trained on Devon, waiting for my chance to help. Devon growled in frustration as he tried to regain his footing, but Adrian was relentless, his strikes unforgiving. With each move, I saw Adrian's power, his true power, shining through, his determination unwavering. But I knew it wasn't over yet. I couldn't let my guard down. I couldn't let Devon have the upper hand again. I moved closer, watching the fight, waiting for the right moment. And then, I saw it. Devon was momentarily distracted, his focus shifting just enough for me to strike. With all the strength I could muster, I ran toward him, my dagger aimed for his side. I could see the surprise in his eyes as the blade sunk deep into his flesh. Devon let out a roar of pain, staggering back as the blood poured from the wound. For a brief moment, the fight slowed, and I could see the realization in Devon's eyes. He had underestimated me. Together, Adrian and I had finally managed to corner him. And this time, it was over. Devon staggered back, his eyes wide with shock, his hand pressed against the wound where my dagger had struck. The blood was dark, almost black in the dim light, but the look on his face was something I would never forget. He had underestimated me, and now, for the first time, I could see the fear in his eyes. He had thought he could break us, that we would fall. But Adrian and I weren't going to let that happen. Adrian's eyes flicked toward me, a brief flash of approval in his gaze, and then he was moving again, faster than I could track. He reached Devon in an instant, his movements fluid and precise. With a single motion, Adrian grabbed Devon by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The force of the action sent a ripple through the room, and the vampires around us froze, unsure of what would happen next. Devon's feet dangled above the floor, his eyes widening as Adrian's grip tightened. "You don't deserve to walk this earth anymore, Devon," Adrian said, his voice cold and unforgiving. I could see the anger burning in him, the rage that had been building for years, finally coming to a head. This was the end. The fight was over, and Devon had lost. "You've betrayed everything you once stood for," Adrian continued, his grip unyielding. "And now, you'll face the consequences." Devon struggled, his hands clawing at Adrian's arm, but it was useless. "You're nothing," Devon spat, his voice ragged with desperation. "You're weak, just like your kingdom was. You'll fall, just like they did." Adrian's expression darkened, but he didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. With a swift motion, he snapped Devon's neck, and the vampire leader went limp in his hands. For a moment, there was silence. The vampires around us seemed frozen in place, their eyes wide, unsure of what to do now that their leader was gone. I felt a strange sense of finality in the air, as if the world had shifted in that moment. Devon was no longer a threat. The room was still. "It's over," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Adrian stood there, holding Devon's lifeless body, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem to feel any sense of relief, no sense of victory. For a moment, he was simply a man burdened by the weight of his past, his choices. Finally, he let Devon's body fall to the ground, the thud echoing through the room. He turned to me, his eyes softening for just a moment, and I saw something in them. A flicker of something human, something I hadn't seen before. "You did it," I said softly, stepping toward him. "We did it," he corrected, his voice hoarse. "You're not just a part of this world, Rachel. You've made your mark." I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know what my place was in this world now, or what would come next. But one thing was certain, I wasn't afraid anymore. I had chosen this path, and no matter what, I would see it through. The vampires who had been standing in the shadows slowly began to disperse, their fear of Devon's death palpable. Leora moved past me, her eyes scanning the room. She nodded to Adrian, her expression neutral. "It's done," she said simply. "But this isn't the end. There's always more to be done." Adrian didn't reply, but I could see the tiredness in his eyes, the exhaustion from years of running, fighting, and hiding. But it wasn't just the physical weariness. It was the weight of a life lived on the edge, a life that had never allowed him to truly rest. I stepped closer to him, my hand reaching for his. It was the first time I had initiated contact, but I knew he needed it. We had been through hell together, and we weren't alone anymore. We had made it through, together. He looked down at my hand for a moment, then met my eyes, his gaze full of unspoken emotions. Without a word, he took my hand, his grip steady and warm. The weight of the past was still there, but for the first time, it felt a little lighter. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew that Adrian and I would face it together. The world around us had changed, and so had we. We weren't the same people we had been when we first met. The fight had forged something stronger between us. We had become something more than just allies. We had become partners. As the last of Devon's followers slipped away into the shadows, Adrian and I stood together in the middle of the room. The silence was deafening, but in a strange way, it felt peaceful. We had survived, and now we would rebuild. Together. Vampire stories have captivated readers for centuries, combining mystery, danger, and romance in a way that few other genres can match. This tale takes you deep into a world filled with dark secrets, ancient power, and a love that defies all odds. As our protagonist embarks on a journey with a vampire king, she quickly learns that she is no longer just an observer, but an integral part of the battle for survival. With every twist and turn, the lines between ally and enemy blur, and she finds herself fighting not only for her life, but for a love that could change everything. Vampire stories have always been about more than just creatures of the night. They are about the emotional and psychological challenges that come with immortality, power, and love. In this story, the heroine steps into a world that is dark, dangerous, and full of mystery, but through every trial, her connection to the vampire king only grows stronger. As the forces of evil close in, the struggle becomes a fight for the future and for their very survival. This is a powerful addition to the world of vampire stories, blending intense action with deep emotional stakes, showcasing the struggle to protect everything that matters. With the stakes higher than ever and danger lurking around every corner, this thrilling journey will keep you on the edge of your seat, making it a must-read for fans of vampire stories looking for adventure, romance, and a fight for survival that will resonate long after the story ends.